Last lesson, we looked at slope-intercept form of a line in order to graph. Today, we're going to look at slope-intercept form in order to make an equation. So we're going the reverse direction. And it's going to turn out that really all we have to do is figure out the slope and figure out the y-intercept, and then plug them into the equation, and away we go. So here's a quick couple of examples. And again, we want to write the equation of a line in y equals mx plus b, and we're going to fill in for m and b. So if we can find the slope pictorially, and if we can find the y-intercept pictorially, then it really is that simple. So first of all, in this example right here, there's my slope, or sorry, there's my y-intercept, 0, -2. And in order to find my slope, I simply pick two nice points. And I'm going to pick this one, and I'm going to pick this one. Remember, it doesn't matter which points you pick, because the slope is going to be the same all the way along the line. And in order to go the vertical direction, I go up 2, and the horizontal direction, I go right 2. So in this example above, our y-intercept is going to be 0, -2, and our slope is going to be 2 over 2, or just 1, however you want to write it. And then when we write it in y equals mx plus b form, we just put the right thing in the right spot, y equals 1x minus 2. And that's how easy it is. Or, if you don't want to write it like that, you can just drop the 1, y equals x minus 2. So that's a big idea today. Of course, we're going to get a little bit more complicated, but that's basically it. So in this example over here, there's my y-intercept right there. And in order to find the slope, I pick any two nice points. And in this one, I'm going to go down 2, and I'm going to go right 1. So in this case right here, my y-intercept is 0, 3, and my slope is equal to -2 over 1, down 2, right 1, and then in y equals mx plus b, I'm going to put my slope, and I'm going to put my y-intercept, and there is the equation of the line. So the big ideas in simply writing the equation of a line in slope-intercept form is find the slope and the y-intercept and plug them into the right place. Find the slope and the y-intercept, then plug into the correct part of the, I'll call it a formula, but you could call it whatever you want. So that's how easy it is. But how does it get harder? Well, it gets harder when you aren't given a picture, or you aren't given the y-intercept or anything like that. So here's an example of, we've done this graph before, and right now I just want to come up with the equation. So it's always a good idea to see a picture. A picture is great. So 2, 5, there's our 2, 5, and a slope of 4. So remember, slope of 4 is a 4 over 1. We want to find the y-intercept. So if I go up 4, right 1, I'm moving away from where I want to go. So I'm just going to go down 4, left, down 4, left. And I'll just do one more in case you wanted to draw the line. But again, I could actually solve this question pictorially. I have my slope information right here, and all I need is my y-intercept. So I have figured out the slope, I have figured out the y-intercept, and now I'm just going to plug it in. So y is equal to 4x minus 3. Now, there is another way to solve this algebraically, and the way you solve it algebraically is you plug in the slope in this example. So I'm going to go ahead and let's pretend that we don't know the equation of this line. So we're going to go ahead and do this algebraically. Well, we're always going to start off with mx plus b, and we're going to plug in the information we know. And in this case right here, we absolutely know that the slope is 4. So this looks like a really difficult equation to solve because there are three unknowns. There's a y, an x, and a b. And the one we want to figure out is we want to figure out b. So it seems like x and y are the problem, but they're not a problem because I know an x and a y. I know an x and a y on this graph. I know this is an x on this picture, and I know this is a y on this picture. So what I can do is I could substitute those values in for y and x, and the only letter that will be left over is b. Now this mathematically, this is because the equation of a line property. So I'm just going to plug these things in the right place. And remember, whenever you substitute, you should get in the habit of brackets. I'm not going to put brackets around the 5 because now we only have one letter we don't know. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to solve that equation. We're going to subtract 8 from both sides. And when we do, we get b is equal to -3. And just like we knew a few minutes ago, there is the equation of a line. So algebraically, we can relatively quickly, relatively simply, we can figure out the equation of a line in y equals mx plus b. So let's do a few more examples. Again, same question, right? The equation of a line that passes through -3, 9 and has a slope of -2/3. Now, again, some people might get a bit intimidated by the fractions, but they're just fractions. So step number 1, I always get in the habit of writing down what I want, mx plus b, and I'm going to plug in whatever I know, and here's what I know. But I also know an x, and I also know a y. So I'm going to go ahead and plug those in. 9 is equal to -2/3 times -3/1. Remember what we've talked about the last few lessons. Always enter, if you have a fraction, enter the integer as a fraction. It makes things easier. Now we're just going to go ahead and simplify. A negative times a negative is a positive. We get 2 times 3/3 times 1 plus b. And 9, 6/3 is 2. And subtract 2 from both sides, and we get 7. So our equation of a line is -2/3 x plus 7. So let's do that. Let's try doing that pictorially and making sure that we do get a y-intercept of 7. So I'm going to go ahead and plot -3, 9, and then I'm going to use the slope information. I'm going to go down 2, and I'm going to go over 3, and look at that right there. There is our y-intercept of 7. So to write the equation of a line, in my mind, it's a three-step process. And our first step is plug in slope. Now, as you're going to see in a minute, you might have to find the slope, but slope is really easy to find. So we're going to always focus on the slope first, and we're going to figure out what it is or have what it is, and we're going to plug it into the formula. Then step number 2 is we're going to plug in a coordinate, an x comma y, into the right place, meaning you put the x with the x and the y with the y in the right place. And then what we're going to do is we're going to solve for b, and remembering that b represents the y-intercept. And then finally we're going to plug in this value and into the formula, and there is our y equals mx plus b. So it really is a recipe, and if we can practice enough, we'll be good. But again, as I said before, a picture is always good. It actually gives you a really good idea of what the answer is supposed to be. So we'll do another couple of examples that are a bit trickier, but only algebraically. So in this one right here, we want to write the equation of a line in mx plus b. So we're going to start with our y equals mx plus b. We are going to plug in the slope. I know the slope. Now, what I want to do before we go ahead and finish this off is I want to have an idea of what the y-intercept is. So I'm going to plot my -5, -6. There's my -5, -6, and I'm going to use a slope of 4/3. And I'm going to try to figure out, do I get lucky? Can I solve this pictorially? So if I go up 4 over 3, and if I go up 4 over 3, well, I hope what you recognize is we didn't hit the y-axis, and if we don't hit the y-axis, you almost never have a nice point. So I think that this answer is going to be a fraction, and if you were very careful and you connected the dots, I'll try to do it as best I can. It might not be good enough. That's not too bad. But what I want you to see is, if I zoom out, the y-intercept is between 0 and 1. So our y-intercept is going to be a fraction. And this is why I say this one's a little bit trickier. We have to worry about fractions. If you're okay with fractions, this is not a problem. So let's go ahead and plug the -6 in for y and the -5 in for x. And when we do that, we get 4 over 3. Remember, always write it as a fraction if you already have a fraction. So here's what we get. We get -6 is equal to -20 over 3 plus b. Now, there's two ways to solve this equation. We can multiply through everything by 3 and get rid of the fractions, but I think mostly these fractions are okay. So here's what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that we make this into thirds. And if we do that, then the fractions will be actually quite easy to add. So -6, let me just do my work over here, -6 is equal to how many thirds? Well, -6 over 1 has to equal something over 3, and I hope we see it has to be -18. And if you don't see where that comes from, well, how do I go from 1 to 3? I multiply by 3. So if this thing's equal, I have to, what I do to the bottom, I do to the top. Again, one of those golden rules you might have learned from before. So -6 turns into -18 over 3. And all we're going to do is add 20 over 3 to both sides. And when we add 20 over 3 to both sides, here's what we get. We get 20 over 3 minus 18 over 3. And that's equal to 2 over 3. So our final equation is y equals 4 over 3x plus 2 over 3. And again, that 2 over 3 makes sense because we knew the answer was between 0 and 1. So again, a little tricky part there. Sometimes you have to deal with fractions. Okay, last example. Write an equation that goes through of the line that has a slope of -3 over 5 and goes through the point -10 comma 3. So I'm gonna draw -10 comma 3. It's a little bit off my grid because for some reason my grids only go to 9. And again, I want to use the idea of slope as a traffic cop and see if I know what the answer is so my algebra makes sense. So I'm going to go down 3 over 5, and I'm going to go down 3 over 5. And in fact, I actually get a nice y-intercept. I hit the y-axis perfectly. So I want to make sure I figure out that -3 is my y-intercept. Again, we start with the equation. We plug in our slope. We plug in a number for x and y. Y is 3, sorry. X is -10, but we're going to write it -10 over 1. Then we go ahead and solve for b. So 3 is equal to, well, a negative times a negative is a positive. 3 times 10 is 30. 5 times 1 is 5. 30 divided by 5 is 6. Subtract 6 from both sides, and look at that. We get exactly as we thought we would get because we're good with pictures. So that's the end of slope and that's the end of equation of a line in slope-intercept form. First lesson was looking at graphing. Second lesson focused on making the equation.